There it is. All right, welcome everybody to another episode of our Labs Open Office Hour. I'm Houston, the host, and we're joined today by Matt Bach. Whoop, there we go, over there. I forget I'm mirrored sometimes. We're joined by Matt Bach, our senior labs technician and Adobe Creative Cloud hardware expert, I think is kind of your extra bonus title.
Yeah, and similar applications like DaVinci Resolve and
oh, that's true. It's you're the content creation bucket,
video and photo kind of stuff. I know it's always tough, like coming up with like names and titles for things is really annoying. Yeah. It's like content creation. Oh well, except like everything that everyone else does is content creation too, except for like engineering.
Well, yeah, okay. So I like how you put it on your name tag there, Matt Bach, video and photo hardware expert. So I like that. Okay, and so today, what are we talking about today, Matt? I kind of know, but what do you got today for us?
Well, first and foremost, any questions that anyone has about really anything. So if you've got any questions, comments about anything, just toss them in chat. But also, I thought we would kind of spend the stream like outside of questions, kind of talking about the new AMD GPUs because we finally got to test the 68 and 6800 XT.
That's right.
We still don't actually have them. We still can't buy any even ourselves. The supply is really tight. But it was Brian from BPS Customs loaned us his cards, and if you look at any of our articles, we've got big thank yous on there because like he overnighted them to us. USPS didn't show up on time, so then it was actually like 2 or 3 days later.
Oh wow!
So he was a little stressed for I think those couple of days, while like USPS just had nothing, and we didn't have them yet. But so we got to spend some time with those guys. So yeah, it's always nice that like a lot of these like hardware people and reviewers and YouTube channels, like it seems like anytime we just reach out to someone like, hey, we still can't get that. Can you loan us one and we'll do you a favor later? They're like, oh yeah, sure. We've done similar with like Linus Tech Tips and a few other people. And it's always nice that the community is just like, yeah, sure. Here you go.
I think it's a lot of fun too, because I tend to have for my work, I tend to have a bit of a relationship with these people as well, and so it's nice to see everybody just getting along.
Yeah,
it's always cool.
Yeah. There's not like competition, which is odd. Like you would think that like a lot of people who are doing the similar things, there's like competition between them, but usually it's not. It's more of a like collaboration. I mean, I'm sure there is some, but it seems like there's a lot of collaboration, which is nice. Yeah. It's always good to see people working together rather than like fighting against each other.
Yeah, the drama is lame. Yeah, nobody likes that stuff. So where would you like to start? We're looking at the new AMD graphics cards.
Yeah. Well, again, until we start getting some questions, I guess we'll just kind of start going through what we were seeing.
Sure.
So a little bit of background on these cards. These were launched. When were they launched? A couple of months ago.
I should know this, right?
In any articles?
Right. I should know this too, right? This is part of it's kind of what we do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's always funky, especially on things like this, where like
there's been what, 8 launches in as many weeks? Come on.
It's been a little bit more than that, but yeah, it's been kind of tough for us because of all these rolling launches. Like rolling launches, I guess, are nice for a lot of like the content creators, like the reviewers and stuff, because like, hey, I can do a video on the 3090, and then 2 weeks later, I can do another video on the 3080, and then another one on the 3070, and now the 3060 Ti was like earlier this week, and so it gives them like rolling content. But for us, man, it sucks because we have to do all of our testing, and we like to redo all of our testing whenever there's a new product launch. We don't like to reuse old results. Which I think a lot of reviewers do. They just reuse old stuff. But we're in the different situation where like we need to know how performance is with the latest version of like the Adobe applications and stuff. And they do an update every couple of months.
Yeah, and that can make actually a big difference.
Yeah.
Especially recently with some of the new like hardware accelerated stuff and things like that. It can make a big difference.
Yeah, it absolutely can. So we always need to be testing on the latest. I mean, a lot of those like hardware reviewers, they care about the hardware performance more than anything. So like if it's a little bit older version of, say, Premiere Pro, it doesn't really matter for them because most of their viewers are not, video editors. For us, like it's probably still the majority of our readers are not, video editors. They are tech enthusiasts, but our targeted audience from like the workstation side is the video editors. So we have to they're the ones who pay our bills, basically. So we need to make sure our testing applies mostly to them, not to like tech enthusiasts. And so yeah, we always have to be testing on new ones. And these last ones, like we've been going against the grain because like, yeah, we can't redo all of our testing every 2 weeks. Like it takes 2 weeks to do all of our testing.
Yeah, right.
Like, and we've got other stuff to do.
Yeah, it's been pretty crazy. So
yeah, so and we're still in the middle of it because the 3060 Ti again was earlier this week. Hopefully, we'll get a card soon.
That was
and we can do testing.
That seemed like a big surprise. Like it was. I saw a lot of talk about. I mean, there's been talk about all kinds of like behind the scenes models coming, like a 3080 Ti or the 20 gigabyte 3070 or whatever. But this one, it was one of those things that was like a rumor that just suddenly was like, hey guys, guess what? It's true. And
and just like, oh, it's launched now, and like there's better availability of it than every other card so far, and like there's more of it than the 6800 series from AMD and all this kind of stuff, which to us, I don't know. It's always weird for us too, because AMD I don't think does very much through disti to system integrators like us. I think most of their stuff goes to, Best Buy, Micro Center, Newegg, for end users. So we can't take advantage of all of our disti connections about like putting in back orders and working with AMD to make sure we have allocation and all that kind of stuff, because there's like nothing in disti, so we can't do anything. But yeah, the 3060 Ti was a bit of a surprise, and we'll see. Hopefully, I don't know. That card is going to be really interesting because it looks like it's kind of the 3070, but like the ones that didn't quite make it to 3070, because I think it's basically the same thing as 3070, just lower stream processor count and maybe a lower frequency. I haven't looked too far into it because we don't have a card yet. But so if it's just a lower bin, that would kind of make sense. They had all of this 3070 cards that didn't quite make it as 3070s. So they turn off stuff, and now it's a 3060 Ti. I mean, Intel and AMD do that with CPUs. Everyone does it. That's how you do it. You manufacture for a higher product, and then anything that doesn't make it, you turn off stuff, and now it's a lower product, and you sell it for less.
Right.
It just goes down the stack. But yeah, and then this month, it's supposed to be like next week or in a little bit, the 6900 XT will be launching.
Oh, snap.
Man, I hope that's the last card for a while.
Nah.
Because, man, like these rolling launches just take forever for us. It's just, because then we have to decide, okay, at what point do we draw a line? Okay, now we have to restart all of our testing because things have changed too much in software that we have to do it. And I think we're about at that point now. But so we're getting there. And probably after this, there'll be like Radeon Pro cards or Quadro or whatever it is they're calling it now. I think they're dropping the Quadro name, but there'll be workstation cards for us to look at. And then there'll be an Intel CPU launch or an AMD CPU launch. It's always something more.
So we did have a quick little question. They were asking, when is the 3060 Ti coming? And just to address that right now, it has officially launched. It was just a couple days ago, but much like the situation is everything right now, finding one is going to be very difficult. So
it's supposedly it's going to be a lot better, at least in like retail. So the things I've heard, because there's people who like talk with like Micro Center and they get behind the scenes things. And the things I was seeing on Twitter was that the supply already for the 3060 Ti is as good or better than the 3070.
Oh, nice.
And at least for us, like it's very different disti. So like us system integrators and retail, but for us, the RTX cards are starting to be okay. Like we're still way backlogged because it took a while for things to get out, but now I think we're producing and shipping our workstations as fast as we can, so there's no longer a supply bottleneck on those.
That's nice.
That's great.
All right, so where are we going to start? What have you got to show us?
Here, why don't you just switch over screen and I'll just pow. Okay. So for those that aren't familiar, we have a whole bunch of articles. If you go to PugetSystems.com, go to publications. Here, I'll just do it. Go to articles. There's some stuff that we're working on. It's above the fold down that you can't see. But then there's all the articles we'll work on. We've been doing a lot of these review roundups recently. So normally we produce an article per application that we test because, like I was mentioning before, our our testing and everything is funded by our workstation sales, and our like our actual customers, they don't care about general performance. They care about performance in what they do every day. So that's why we sort it by application, so we can really dive deep.
Right.
But we have been doing these roundups for the people that are more, they just want general, or maybe they have a wider workflow, so they need to make sure, and they want to be able to see at a glance how different cards perform. So I guess we'll just go through here, and then we'll just kind of take some questions as we go.
Yeah.
So DaVinci Resolve was the biggest one that, at least in my wheelhouse, that I got a lot of questions about, because it's uses the GPU a ton. It has great scaling. You can use, well, with the free version, 1 GPU. With the studio version, I think it technically goes up to 8 GPUs is what you can use. Generally, we see performance kind of plateaus around 3. At that point, you just start becoming CPU bottlenecked, and like it doesn't matter how, because GPUs are just so powerful now these days that they're starting to take over. But what you can see in here, so this is the GPFX score, the best case for GPUs in our benchmark. And the 6800 and 6800 XT are the dark red here. The older cards, like the 5700 XT, which is still a current card. The new cards are not replacing the old ones, they're just supplementing. So like the 5700 XT, I think it's like a $400 card, and the 6800 is a... let me switch back to one of these articles because I have 6800 is a it's basically a $600 card.
Okay.
MSRP. If you actually like to buy one now, you're probably going to be paying like $1,500.
Yeah, right.
But so performance over the previous generation is terrific. It's like a 2x increase in performance over the 5700 XT. The Vega series is kind of an oddball. I think that one actually is technically no longer being manufactured. But that was like the last card where they were really optimizing for things outside of gaming, as far as I understand. So that card was actually still a great card. But so yeah, 2x increase in performance. Good job, AMD. But, but because of the new 3000 series from NVIDIA, NVIDIA is still way out on top. If this had been like 2 months ago, before the 3000 series, AMD would be about on par, because the pricing, the 2070 Super is about the same as the 6800, which is again about the same as the 3070. So like, yeah, a couple months ago, AMD would pretty much be pulling level, which then, because the AMD cards have a whole lot more VRAM, they have 16 gigs of VRAM, that would make them clear, a nice winner for DaVinci Resolve, at least on the like mid-range. Still upper end, NVIDIA would pull ahead with the 2080 Ti and the Titan. But it'd be a very great card because they had 16 gigs of VRAM. Now though, I mean, you can see like, these cards here are both more expensive than the 3070 and slower. The 6800 XT is, I think, $50 less expensive than the 3080, and the 3080 is way up here. So $50 gets you what is it, like a 70% performance increase. So it's, I know a lot of people are excited about AMD and DaVinci Resolve, but I mean, it's huge performance gains over last gen, but NVIDIA saw just as large of performance gains with their new cards. So
it feels like this, at least with the data I'm looking at here, that this graphics card kind of launch is very similar to the 3000 series CPU launch in compared to Intel. Like this is their step where they're kind of breaking even, and even though their competitors kind of a little bit ahead. So it'll be, I mean, they're making good progress. I feel like.
Yeah, and it was similar, like the 3000 series Ryzen stuff. So was that second gen Ryzen? I don't know.
I'm not sure how they've been doing.
I think it was
generations.
Those cards, or those CPUs, like they had way higher core count, so they were really nice in some situations. Just like how these new AMD video cards have a whole lot more VRAM, so in some situations they'll be really nice. It's kind of weird in Resolve though, because how the VRAM breakdown works, like how much VRAM you want. If you're doing 4K timelines, an 8 gig GPU is fine. So like pretty much anything you would buy is going to do 4K just fine. 8K, you need about 20 gigs of VRAM is what we recommend. So there you're basically limited to the 3090, because that's the only card that has more than 20 gigs of VRAM. It's only in like these weird in-between places that not many people really are, that the 16 gigs of VRAM on these new AMD cards would actually be beneficial. It's going to be like 6K. People who want to work with 6K timelines in DaVinci Resolve, which there's just really not that many people doing that. There's some people doing 5K, but you could probably the 11 gig on the 2080 or 3080, sorry, or 10 gigs on the 3080 is probably okay. So yeah, it's just kind of a weird place. It's going to be nice for some people, but man, like the performance difference between here and like going, especially up to like the 3090 is massive.
Yeah,
like,
it's huge.
The 3090 is a more expensive card. Like
Yeah,
it's like $800
significantly.
more.
Yeah.
But man, if you have and actually are working regularly with like 6K cameras and 8K cameras and stuff, that's not a whole lot of money
Yeah, I was gonna
compared
say-
to your total budget. Like
Yeah,
you're
you
probably
probably got
paying
it.
more in storage for every project than that $800. So
All right.
yeah, so it's an interesting.
So that covers Resolve.
Mhm.
How does it look into the Adobe stuff?
Kind of similar.
Yeah.
Premiere is probably the best showing, at least in my stuff, for these new cards. So again, compared to previous generation down here, nice performance gains. What was it? 40% performance gain over the 5700 XT and Vega. So that's great. Like
Yeah.
40% performance gain. Good job. But once again, like the 3070 is a hair faster than the 6800, basically ties the 6800 XT, and that's a decent amount more expensive. The VRAM is going to be less important in Premiere Pro than it is in DaVinci Resolve. So
Okay.
16 gigs of VRAM in DaVinci Resolve or in Premiere Pro, it's not really a big deal.
Well, no, why would that be? Why does Resolve and maybe this is a little deeper than we get into, but like why is the VRAM issue not as much of a problem with
It
Premiere?
just depends on how the data is being stored in the VRAM. This is a little beyond me, so some of this might be wrong. But I know that like in DaVinci Resolve, it's actually a mathematical formula that they put out on some. It's been a while since I saw it, but it was on some old doc where like, here's a big string of math to help you figure out how much VRAM you need, because it's like number of pixels, width times height times color depth times a few other things, and then that tells you pretty much how much VRAM you need. Or maybe that was After Effects. Maybe it was After Effects, like how much memory you needed per frame. But it still like applies. It's all math.
Sure.
But DaVinci Resolve, I think it does more things on the GPU than Premiere, so more stuff has to be stored in VRAM than in Premiere. So, so it can use the GPU a lot better. So, like if you look at like this score distribution here, like it's only difference between the highest and the lowest is about 2x.
Yeah.
If we go up to Resolve, the difference between the highest and the lowest is like 3 or 4x.
Right.
So it uses the GPU a whole lot more. But so basically, it's kind of the similar thing. Like, it's a lot closer, so you lose less performance going with AMD over NVIDIA, but you're still a little bit behind. So better showing from AMD. I will say, though, that we had a lot of weird issues in Premiere that didn't even make it into our articles.
Okay.
One, I really dislike AMD's drivers. Not because of the drivers, but because of all the junk it installs. I hate their, like, what is it? The AMD live streaming stuff. And the reason why I hate it is not because of like the actual streaming stuff. It's because it puts in like 100 different hotkeys, and a lot of them conflict with Adobe default hotkeys. So we have to go in, and every time we have to go in and like turn off a bunch of hotkeys so that we can actually import things into Lightroom or actually do these things, and it's really annoying. So that's one thing I don't like. But we also had to like clear our preferences in Premiere Pro before we could get anything beyond just a black screen in Premiere, which was weird. We've never had to do that before. We've never had to do that with even like these 5700 XT and Vegas. It was just these new cards. And I mean, we deal with new launches all the time. In fact, because we couldn't get these cards for so long, these are probably some of the most mature products we've tested in quite some time. So that's a little bit of a concern for me as well. I know historically AMD has been a little bit behind NVIDIA in terms of like drivers and driver reliability and such. So that's a little concern for us as well, seeing that come up in our testing.
Weird.
So
very strange.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, again, just to kind of summarize this, like it's a lot closer. You're going to see a lot less of a performance drop, especially since what we're looking here is kind of like the best case scenario for GPUs most of the time. Like if you go into our actual articles, where's our Premiere one? the first thing we start off with is like, here's our overall scores,
Yeah.
because this is really what you're going to kind of see. And the difference is not all that much
Wow.
between, although interestingly, the overall score is shows that the 3070 is even more faster than the 6800 XT. That's because
Mm.
here we go. Encoding, GPU encoding was added
Oh,
a couple versions back,
yeah.
and AMD is quite a ways behind NVIDIA for exporting.
And is that
So
because the software utilizes CUDA over OpenCL?
no, it uses both.
Oh, okay.
It's just for whatever reason. I mean, Adobe has even told us that like, yeah, it works better on NVIDIA right now. The actual like decoding chip. What is it on NVIDIA? It's called the NVENC Invent
Right.
chip. I forget what it is on AMD, but so it could just be like that chip might just be faster,
Oh,
or it
okay.
might be that CUDA is easier to work with, so Adobe is able to get better performance out of it more easily than OpenCL or whatever it is that AMD is using for encoding. We don't really know. I mean, all
Yeah.
we can ever deal with is the what, not really the why.
Sure. Yeah. Well, because like Adobe's not going to let us look at the source code, or is
Yeah.
that even that far we would want to dig into something, even if we could? Like,
Yeah, I mean, there's some
I
people who
think,
do really great like analysis of why things are, but
right.
that takes way more time than just the what. And we are already so far behind. And most of our customers, they don't care about the why. They just care
Yeah.
that like, oh, yep,
The,
yep,
the,
NVIDIA is way faster.
the
Great,
fact
done.
that it is. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they don't care about. Yeah. So, so that's Premiere Pro.
All
And
right.
after that, it gets kind of in like After Effects, GPU is a whole lot less important, but
Which still kind of trips me out because After Effects is all about the visual effects and like those sorts of things. You would think that it would rely more heavily on the graphics card for because we're talking like some of it is like some of it's vaguely simulation, smoke or whatever, or
mhm.
sparks and things, and it still to this day surprises me how little the GPU affects After Effects when you would think a lot of that stuff would be heavily GPU accelerated.
Yeah, it's. I think there's a combination of things. I mean, we get these kind of comments and questions quite a bit. Like, I think some of it is that a lot of the code is very legacy. It's very old.
Sure.
Because in a lot of this stuff, like After Effects, Premiere Pro, Photoshop, all of these ones, like they are massive programs. Like you can do so much in them.
Yeah.
And some of that code is probably from version one and like
Oh
it
yeah.
worked. So it's never been tweaked.
Mm.
And things just kind of add up. And Adobe has, in the maybe the last 2 years, they've been making a huge push on adding like GPU acceleration. And
That's
so
true.
it's massively faster now than it was before. But some of it is also too that like some of the stuff that they've moved to the GPU, it's so good on the GPU that it doesn't really let the GPU stretch its legs. Like I've used this analogy a whole lot, but like imagine you're flying somewhere.
Hmm.
You've got to drive to the airport, then you got to get on the plane and fly, and then you got to drive to your final location.
Right.
If you make your drive way faster, in some cases that will make your entire trip way shorter. In other cases, like okay, I turned my 1 minute drive down to 2 seconds, but I still have a 10-hour flight.
Right.
So it's these things like they've moved these things to the GPU and they're massively faster, but the majority of the stuff is still being done on the CPU, and a lot of
Okay.
that stuff cannot be done on the GPU. Like it's single threaded. It's A then B then C then D. You can't run it in parallel,
Hmm.
and so it doesn't really matter. Like you get those performance gains. Like yeah, sure, you still save 10 minutes over your trip, but you still got a 10-hour flight.
Right. What's 10 minutes in a 12-hour trip, start to
Yeah.
finish? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's different applications, different things you're doing are going to have different things. That's the same reason why like GPUs are not really ever going to become a major consideration in like engineering applications when you're like CAD stuff. Like rendering, yeah, sure, simulation, sure, but like the actual modeling and viewing models, no, not really, because all of that stuff is like you start with a point here, and then the next point is calculated based on the point before it, and the point after that is calculated based on the point before it. So you have to do it in serial. You can't do it in parallel. Just
Hmm.
that's just the nature of how it works. So they'd have to completely redo how all of it works in order to, be able to take advantage of that.
Hmm.
So
We have kind of a, I guess, a question slash comment from YouTube. Tulios, here we'll switch back to Tulios Tech asks, can you guys do an article on NVDEC, so NVIDIA's decoder, and how both AMD and NVIDIA do not support H265, H422 at 8-bit, 10-bit, or 12? That is why footage from cameras like Sony A7S III is bad, is hard to work with. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it probably isn't supported. Yeah, we don't have an article on that. I do know that yeah, where is it? Somewhere NVIDIA and AMD both have lists, as well as Intel have lists of what codecs and like color depth and chroma sampling and all that kind of stuff are supported by different things. Most of the time, it's pretty darn similar. I think there's still a few that QuickSync can do that NVIDIA cards can't.
Okay.
But
is
yeah,
there something you want to show here?
Well, I guess you can show this. This isn't what I was looking for. I was trying to pull something up, and like this was one. It's kind of an example, I guess. I don't even know what this is from. This doesn't even have the latest stuff.
Oh, okay.
But like, so they'll list different kinds of ones. Like it should be able to find it, but it's fine. Maybe it's just on Wikipedia. Yeah, kind of. Okay, so this kind of works. It looks like they don't have the latest stuff. You can go ahead and show this again. But so yeah, like there's certain ones like down here, this 2080 Ti. There's a couple of those over here, and those are AV1. So yeah, I don't think this is a full list either. So yeah, it can be tough to find all those things out. The other thing though to keep in mind as well is that GPU decoding isn't a magic fix for a lot of stuff. Well, because you have two sides. You've got the decoding and the encoding. On the encoding side, some people don't like to use it because the quality is slightly lower for your bit rate. So if someone like wants to really have really high quality and like it's a relatively, it's not a feature like film or something, which, I mean, you shouldn't be exporting to H64 anyway. But they want the best quality. They're willing to let it go for a little bit longer. They'll use software because it's the best, like maybe you're trying to keep, or this is your final delivery. It's not, one of the revisions. It's the final delivery to a client. Yeah, you wanted the best quality. The decoding, though, yeah, it's just really tough because so many people, if they even understand that H264 is hard to decode, they might not understand that like H264 is not a single thing. It's not like well, hey, I'm holding a pen here. It's kind of like pens. Like a pen is a pen, but you have so many different kinds of pens, and each one is slightly different. And like, yeah, so it is really tough. The best thing we've found for our customers is we've started doing a thing where we ask our customers to send us some of their media, and we throw it onto a system and show them how it'll actually perform on the latest systems, whatever they're actually going to be buying. And so they can see like, okay, yeah, it will be way better, or nope, it still has some performance issues. I'll have to adjust my workflow because there's only so much hardware can fix things. Throwing money at problems can only get you so far.
Right. So there's mention here that it seems that the M1 stuff, the Apple M1 laptops are able to crunch through that fairly smoothly, whereas I guess your normal workstations don't.
Yeah, I mean, because they have different GPU or different decoding chips. I'm not sure on the details. I don't even know if that's kind of details that Apple will even advertise, which kind of sucks. Apple tends to not be super clear about like a lot of their like specs and stuff. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a few things. Also, conversely, there's going to be other stuff that like, yeah, it's not going to like. I actually happen to have one of them right here, one of the M1s. We got it for benchmark development of when the new ARM apps come out. We need to make sure our benchmarks will work with it. But yeah, it's going to be anytime you're dealing with hardware acceleration, you're going to have some devices that are going to work better for some things and some devices that are going to work better for other things. Like Apple will also probably be better for ProRes RAW. I mean, ProRes is made by Apple. They've got their whole afterburner card for the Mac Pros and all that, which is, I don't quite know why. Who's going to be doing like 8-stream multicam with ProRes RAW? I'm sure someone will. But they have those products, and those don't exist on PC side. But at the same time, you've got like red footage that has really, really good GPU decoding,
Hmm.
and GPUs are just so far behind on Apple compared to PCs that like you're going to get way better performance on PC, even a laptop, than you would on like the M1 or any Apple stuff. So it's all everything with computers. They're just tools. If
Right.
the M1 is going to be way better than like a Windows laptop for you because of the specific footage you're working with, great, do
Oh
it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
They're just tools.
Right.
There's nothing inherently better or worse about one versus the other. Now, like a
Hmm.
crappy PC that you bought that was like bargain basement and has a whole bunch of stability issues, yeah, sure. Then there's a difference. But in terms of like raw performance, yeah, just get the one that works.
Hmm. Yeah, there's comments here that H265 is supported at 4x2x0 and 4x4x4 at
Just
all
not
depths,
422.
but yeah, not 422.
Yeah, yeah, it's all weird. And there's so many different variations. Each one of those has to have its own like decoding, I guess, built into it. So
Yeah.
I have no idea how AMD and NVIDIA go through deciding, and Intel, honestly, with QuickSync, it go like deciding what ones they're going to tackle. They must have some sort of like market analysis of these are the most common,
Right.
ones or something. But it would be interesting to see if like the new Quadros, what is it, A6000 or whatever it is that are supposed to be coming soon, if those will have different, like that'd be a really nice thing for NVIDIA to do. Like, well, I kind of don't want to say this because there's a good of ideas, but one thing they could do is on their consumer GPUs, they could just have the decoding be for things that like YouTube playback and
Yeah.
consuming, versus on the Quadro stuff or whatever it's going to be called now. That's where they put in more of the hardware acceleration for more obscure things, 444 or 422, all that kind of stuff, because that doesn't have to go to the general public, but it does
Sure.
benefit the smaller user base. And then they don't have to do as much qualification or QC work on all of their GPUs to handle
Everything.
20 different kinds. They
Yeah.
can just do the 2 or 3 on the consumer stuff and do that only on the workstation class stuff.
That'd be
Yeah,
kind
that'd
of
be kind
cool.
of cool. That'd be nice.
Yeah. Ah. All right, so we lift off with After Effects.
Oh,
What's
yeah.
next?
That's right. We're talking about the 6800.
No, it's all right. It's all good.
No, yeah, no, this is good. I mean, questions always take it. I mean, that's kind of the crux of things. After this, I'll switch back over again.
Oh, sure.
Because it's going through a lot quicker on this, and then we can start talking about whatever we want.
Yeah.
So Photoshop, I also tested. Photoshop, massive. You get a big bump going from like onboard graphics or having no GPU acceleration to having a GPU.
Yeah.
But kind of like what we were talking about before, where like a total trip time, cutting your driving time down when you have a long flight doesn't matter. Same thing here. So like all the GPUs is kind of the same. On these cards, I didn't even do Lightroom, but Lightroom was the same thing. So it was even less because having no GPU was like the same. That one I didn't do because there are things in Lightroom that should show it, but it's not stuff we're able to test right now. So we need to figure out ways of testing like slider performance and brush lag. Lag is the hardest thing to test. It's like impossible. But it's where it should be the most useful. So I didn't even test it because it just wasn't worth the time. I think we even had results, but I didn't want to write an article.
Oh, sure. I like it. I think it's very humorous to me when you do Photoshop GPU testing, because it's like, why do I even do this? It's all basically the same,
Yeah,
it hasn't changed
Photoshop
much.
Should and there's some new stuff like we need to do a revamp of a lot of our testing here soon. But like there's some new like neural filters in Photoshop. That's all AI based. The problem with that is I think a lot of the processing is done in the cloud. So if Adobe's servers are busy, the performance is going to be lower. So that doesn't really work for a benchmark because like, time of day will affect things, your internet speed. Like we can't do that. But there is other AI things. There's some like sky replacements and things like that. And hopefully that will show some better performance difference with different GPUs. But yeah, I really need to dive into that. I need to get a hold of the Photoshop devs and like ask them like, hey, we really want to show like the work that you guys are doing, like to make all this stuff way better. Because I know it is.
Right.
Ow. What do we need to test? And then we'll take what they tell us and be like, no, that's unrealistic. We're not going to do that. Or we'll take it and we'll actually apply it. Because I think what I'm finding more and more with like these benchmarks is that it's okay to have some things that are almost borderline synthetic, like something that no one actually does, but it's showing like the largest performance gain you could see with something like a GPU. I think that's okay to do as long as you're presenting it as a like, here's the overall score. This is what most people will see, but
Right.
some people will see more all the way up until this point. And I think it's okay to do that as long as you're being very clear that like this is somewhat unrealistic. Like you might as well run 3D Mark kind of a thing.
Oh, sure.
Versus what most people will actually see, and most people will fall in between. I think that's okay to do, but yeah. And then after that, let's see. We're getting into some of the other things that some of the other guys did. They did. Sure. I had most of my stuff worked fine because it's all like NVIDIA and AMD supported. A lot of the other stuff that we normally test, like all of our rendering engines are CUDA only. So it's like, well, we're not testing AMD.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, or a lot of the photogrammetry stuff, same thing. One of the ones that does support it is Metashape from Magisoft. So this is photogrammetry, take thousands of pictures like from a drone or just walking around like a statue, and it turns it into a 3D model. So really cool stuff.
Super cool.
We've 3D printed miniature Houstons actually that way.
Yeah, we did a car, which was interestingly difficult because the photogrammetry. I think we were using not Pix4D, but the
I don't remember. That was years ago.
Yeah, no, it was it was too long ago. Now that I can't remember, but it had trouble with the transparent window. We did like a Mini Cooper, but the 3D print actually like printed part of the driver's seat because a couple of the photos that we took around the front of the car like looked through the windshield, and I don't know, I thought that was pretty fun.
Yeah, if you actually wanted to do a photogrammetry of a car, best thing to do would probably be to like tape off the windows or like get some like brown paper and masking tape.
Yeah,
tape the windows because anything clear or reflection is going to really throw it off.
That's
but
fun.
Basically what William saw is that like the new cards are just the AMD cards are just really a lot slower than NVIDIA. So it's like you can see here, he tested a whole lot less cards than I did because it's way worse. I'm not going to even keep going on this because come on guys. Wow. There's no reason to do that. And then outside of that, Kelly, he's the one who's doing a lot of our Unreal Engine testing, which is really interesting for everybody because Unreal is used for everything. Game development, obviously, but it's also being used in film for like pre-visualization. So like being able to see how things will work on a green screen ahead of time, like while they're shooting kind of things. It's even being used for full animated movies these days. It's being used for like architecture and VR training and all this crazy things. Very cool. But he had a lot of issues. I'll bring up his post to kind of show. But basically, what he saw is that like performance for rasterized stuff. So this doesn't have like real time ray tracing, which is some workloads or some workflows like that's all they care about. They don't care about real time ray tracing. And they're okay. They're about on par with NVIDIA. So then you've got to make the choice between like, well, the extra VRAM will be really nice for me, and I don't need ray tracing. Great. You can go NVIDIA or go AMD. But if you're doing any ray tracing, they're quite a bit slower than the NVIDIA cards. So like 3070, again, is cheaper than these new cards, and it's a little bit faster, especially compared to the 6800. But he also had a lot of issues. So like this is what it's supposed to look like. So this is coming from a 3080. And then when he actually did it with AMD, you'll notice there's some problems.
Yeah, there was something about the reflections and stuff was breaking.
Yeah, some things aren't being rendered properly. I think there were some things with textures. And so there's also a new version of Unreal, which when he did this testing was in beta. Now I think it released like yesterday. So now he's like, oh man, now I got to do all this stuff again.
Oops.
But it was supposed to fix a lot of stuff, but it made performance actually worse. So that's like this bright red down here is the new version with the AMD cards, and it's slower than the old version, which is the opposite of what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, weird.
Which isn't unusual in our experience. Sometimes when you see like performance improved with this, and then you actually test it, like, oh no, it actually got worse. I don't know how you got that it improved.
Yeah.
But maybe like they fixed things. So like the fact that this wasn't rendering things properly, maybe they fixed that. So now performance looks worse, but it's actually being done properly.
Right.
So it could be something like that. But he also had other issues. So look, this is a whole lot easier to see, but so like this is with NVIDIA in the new version or old version versus AMD in the new one where they supposedly fix things, but you'll look like on the table here and down here, like some of the lights aren't rendering properly. A lot of the textures on like the wall aren't being done. So there's still a lot of problems in Unreal with these new AMD cards. So we can't really talk about performance until like it works.
Right.
So yeah, it's basically he looked at all this stuff and he just said like, no, just don't do it. Like maybe for some, again, people who not doing any ray tracing might be fine, but like ray tracing is becoming such a critical part of all of these like game engine things that like
Yeah.
you kind of need it. He also looked at like 3ds Max and Maya. Main reason, see, there's no charts in here, is because things like modeling, simulations, GPU won't really matter. But they added a rendering engine called Arnold a couple of years back, and it
Okay.
has GPU-based rendering. But and you can kind of see here, unable to load NVIDIA GPU. It's because there's no NVIDIA GPU when you're using an AMD GPU. So it just doesn't work. So that's why he just put up a post like, yeah, it doesn't work. Like you can do it if you don't want to use the Arnold GPU renderer.
Sure.
But I mean, GPU rendering is just so much massively faster than CPU rendering that like you kind of need it. And all those other rendering engines that you might use, Octane Render, Redshift, V-Ray, they're all NVIDIA only as well. A lot of them are saying that like OpenCL or AMD support is coming, but like I think at best it's in like a beta version, not like an actual release. So it's basically, I think kind of the crux of all of our testing is that, I mean, this wasn't part of our testing, but gaming, yeah, AMD is doing great. They're doing a really good job. So like gaming side, terrific. Content creation side, massive gains over previous generations. So like looking here, like performance gain over the previous cards, terrific, but not enough to catch up to NVIDIA, which is surprising when we say things like the new cards are up to 83% faster than the old card, and yet it's still not enough.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just for most like content creation things, NVIDIA still has the lead. There's going to be a few people where the 16 gigs of VRAM is more important than performance.
Yeah.
Great. But I think for most people, it's just NVIDIA still, it's just, they're too far ahead. We'll see with like the next version of stuff, but I don't know. AMD managed to really take a huge lead over Intel on the CPU side.
Yeah.
I don't feel like NVIDIA is nearly as complacent as Intel was. So
Sure.
We'll have to see if that actually happens or not.
Yeah. It's almost like they have to come out. AMD has to make another big jump in the next 6 months or so. Before there's a 4000 series by NVIDIA kind of thing.
Yeah, and we'll see. I mean, I think AMD is doing the right thing about putting more VRAM on their cards, I think, so to add like an extra benefit to using AMD instead of just straight up performance in these things. Because like, man, NVIDIA, you dropped the amount of VRAM, like going from 2080 Ti to 3080, which I guess isn't a direct comparison, but like you dropped your near top end card from 11 gigs to 10 gigs, which really isn't that big of a deal. Like it's not that massive. But but at least the 3090 is a whole lot cheaper than the Titan RTX was for the 20 gigs of VRAM. Like it was like $1,000 price drop, so that's good.
So here's a good question from Jose Contreras on YouTube. He says, which food is better for me to buy, the 3080? And I think he means card. Better for me to buy 3080 or 3070 for Adobe Premiere Pro 4K 24 FPS.
What codec? Well, it probably won't matter. Basically, 3070 versus 3080. For most editing stuff, I can kind of bring up. You want to switch
data.
Most of the time, like live playback, the GPU doesn't make a massive difference. So like the 3070 and 3080, like you see here, like actually technically the 3070 scored above the 3080 on our live playback test, but like it's within like 1%. So it's basically like you run it one time, one card will be a little faster. You run it another time, another card will be a little faster.
The neutrinos got in the way this time.
Or Windows Update in the background, tiny little things like, or it's just Adobe being Adobe and it's just different from one one to the next. So not going to be a massive difference in most like playback things. If you're talking like you're using red footage, it could be a bigger deal and you probably wouldn't go up to the 3080. If you're talking just like A64, ProRes, that kind of stuff, just do a 3070. I don't think it's worth the investment to go up to the 3080. You're going to get more by taking that money and investing in it and like being able to bump your CPU model a little bit, or
Hmm.
get yourself some nicer storage, or buy a new chair to make you more comfortable so that like your editing will you'll be able to be more in the flow. Like that's going to make a bigger difference for most people than going from 3070 to 3080.
Nice, nice. All right. I have a question, and this is more because I have received these sort of questions as on social media before. Can we get an update to the optimal storage for video editing / Premiere Pro? I've taken some of the results and the conclusions that we've come from the last one, which I think was from
It was a while
Premiere
ago.
2015 or something like that, and have kind of extrapolated forward. But we're getting to a point where M.2s are pretty mainstream now. A lot of people are doing 2, 3 of them. Most people aren't putting platter drives into their working machines. That sort of thing is starting to move more toward cold storage or backup sort of archival stuff. And so I've hoped that I've been given out good information as far as extrapolating from from those conclusions before. But like, some folks are wondering, like, do I put the fast? I have a Sabrent Rocket M.2, which I know we haven't like internally tested or anything, but they're wicked fast.
Mm-hmm.
Do I use that for media scratch? Do I use that for project files? Do I use it for the OS? I have 2 M.2s, one of them, these sorts of things.
Yeah.
And so could you give a little insight into that now, and then
Yeah.
maybe a redo on an update on the article?
Yeah, the reason why we haven't done a redo of the article and probably won't is honestly just because like things are so fast that it doesn't matter.
Sure, like
Like it mattered before when we were talking about like platter drives versus SSD versus this, but like CPUs being faster has actually made things better. And the
Mhm.
storage drives are all like you were saying are way faster. And a lot of the performance differences that we saw before was in very small things. Like in Premiere Pro, it wasn't like it doesn't affect your playback or your exporting times. It was
Mhm.
like your import times into Premiere Pro would be a little bit faster, or like generating peak files or the waveforms that it needs to generate for the audio was a
Right.
little bit faster. But yeah, again, these days it's just so fast that it doesn't really it. Yes, we could do a whole bunch of testing and show you like, yes, 2% faster with this drive. But like
Ah,
it's just 2%. Who cares?
yeah.
So I think at this point it all comes down to um, there's a few like rules of thumb, and
Mhm.
then beyond that it's just organizational. Like I always recommend that people have as much as they can off of their OS drive as possible,
Right.
um, because SSDs have limited read and writes, and the less you can mess with your OS drive, the less likely it is to have problems in the future. And your OS drive is like your one drive that like you can't really back up your OS very easily. Like you can do a system image, but you don't do that as often as you back up like your project files.
Right.
So I try to keep as much not on that drive as possible. And then beyond that, having your cache files on a separate drive is also nice. Again, for the same reason, because cache files are written and read a lot. They're updated constantly. So that's going to limit the lifespan of the drive slightly. Like, is it really going to make a difference? I don't know. Like these SSDs these days are so reliable.
Right.
It's
What's
hard
one
to
day out
say.
of 5 years? Right.
Yeah, but it's kind of like a best practice thing at that point. The other reason why I like putting all the cache files and temporary crap on one drive is that then like, hey, you want to clear your cache because it's getting kind of crazy. You just go on that drive, you select everything, you hit delete, and then like all like Premiere Pro and Photoshop, whatever, like it's like, oh, there's no cache files anymore, whatever, and it just remakes them. So like that's kind of nice to be able to do. And then like a dedicated drive for like your projects and all that, it could be on the same drive as the cache. Like I think the biggest performance thing we saw before was having all your cache files on a different drive than your OS.
Mm-hmm.
So like as long as you do that, like you're good. If you're talking about like I've got a 7 gig a second drive and a 3.5 gig a second drive, which one should I use for either? It's like it's not gonna matter.
Okay.
Like your CPU is the limiting factor on all that stuff because all of your data is compressed. It's kind of like it's all getting zipped and then put onto your drive. I mean, not really
Oh.
zipped, but it's all everything is being compressed and put on the drive, and then your system has to uncompress it in order to launch it. That's why like say Premiere Pro, the exe is only going to be whatever handful of megabytes or gigabytes, but when you actually launch it, it's immediately taking up a whole lot more RAM because
Oh,
it's
right.
actually like having to unpack all this crap, load stuff into RAM and all that. And
Right.
that stuff usually these days is CPU limited because most of it is single threaded. So like it doesn't matter if you got a
Hmm.
64 core CPU or a quad core, as long as they have the same single threaded performance, it's going to launch about the same. So
All right.
yeah, so I don't
Oh,
think performance is as big of a deal anymore.
okay. That makes me feel good about the
Yeah.
advice that I've been
But
giving out.
yeah, the only place I think where it can is like After Effects or DaVinci Resolve in Fusion does the same thing, but you
Hmm.
have a disk cache. So you're playing through like a comp in After Effects. It renders each frame, and each
Hmm.
frame it actually stores into RAM,
Oh.
so that like if you go back, it doesn't have to re-render it. It's just in RAM. It just plays it, and then it also in the background it writes it to your disk cache, so
Oh.
that like if you close After Effects, everything in RAM gets thrown out. So you load up After Effects the next day. If it can read from the disk cache, great. It doesn't have to re-render the frame.
Aha.
Or if you don't have enough RAM for your entire comp, and then you go back to the beginning, it'll overwrite the oldest stuff. And if it's in disk cache, it'll be able to just read it again. So for that, there should be a slight benefit to having a faster drive as your cache drive. That one we have no hard numbers about because all of that being written to the disk cache, After Effects does it in the background. Like it tries to sneak it in whenever it won't affect like your workflow. So like we'll do it one time and like it'll write 100 frames to the disk cache. We'll do the exact same thing again. Oh, this time it did 20. Do it again. This time it did
Oh,
150. Do it again. This time it did 10. It's like, oh,
weird.
great. So it's super inconsistent because it's trying to work it in. Like, so it
Hmm.
depends on what other hundreds of applications running in the background whenever it decides like I can work this in or I can't. So it was really hard to test, but it should make a bit of a difference there.
Okay. We have a question again from YouTube. Asaf Blasberg, videographer, asks, "Is it better to invest in a lot of memory for Fusion to use the Fusion memory cache feature for Resolve?"
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Because that's just and I think Resolve or yeah, Fusion and Resolve does basically the same thing as what I was just talking about.
Oh, yeah.
So the more RAM you have, the more frames you can cache, and like more frames you can cache, the less you have to re-render. Because you never like when you're actually working, like it's different for us when we're benchmarking because like we play one thing once and like okay, great, it took that long. When you're actually working, like you'll play for a little bit and then you'll jump back, you make a tweak, you'll jump back, you tweak, jump back, and all
Hmm.
that stuff. And the more of that stuff that is in RAM, the faster everything is going to go. You're just going to make your workflow so much faster. So
Nice.
yeah, a lot of times for like the systems we're selling for After Effects or for Fusion, like having more RAM is often more important than like the CPU speed. Like
Hmm.
yeah, the CPU speed matters because like that's how fast you can render those frames. But if you don't have to re-render them constantly, that's better than having to do it
Mm,
faster in the first place.
sure.
So some of our customers like 128 gigs of RAM is not uncommon. 256 even
That's
goes
for
up there.
sure.
Usually the people going up to 256, like they've got enough budget that they have the best CPU also. But yeah, 128 gigs of RAM, 64 gigs of RAM, absolutely, I think it's worth it for those kind of workflows.
Nice. So you previously you'd mentioned Arnold. I think is a
Mm-hmm.
GPU renderer. Tullius Tech has mentioned a couple times that he would be very appreciative. He says I would kill for you guys to add Houdini and Arnold 6 to your testing. Is that something we do separate, or is that actually built into like something like V-Ray?
So Arnold, probably what we would do. And I think we kind of have plans. I think the 3ds Max testing we do actually includes an Arnold test.
Okay. Well,
So
because they're the ones who bought up Arnold recently, right? Or have
yeah,
implemented it
no,
into
you're
their
thinking of
renderer, or
Redshift and Maxon.
oh, okay, okay.
But
Just
Arnold, I'm not sure if they're owned by Autodesk or if it's just like a really close partnership. But
mhm.
probably that's how we'll do it. Is unless they come up with a standalone benchmark, because that's what basically what we do for like Octane Render, Redshift, and V-Ray. Like they have their own benchmark, so we don't have to do
Right.
anything. We just run the
Yay.
benchmark. But Arnold, it'll probably be part of our 3ds Max and Maya testing, so it'll be
Mhm.
included in that once we get there. Houdini, man, I don't know. There's because everything we have limited time. Like
Right,
we can't
right.
test everything, and when we decide we want to test something, oh, it is not
Hmm.
a lot.
Hmm.
It's not a minimal amount of work
No.
because especially because we have to automate everything. That's the
Right.
only way we can do all the testing we can. So like yeah, there's people out there who could look at Houdini and just like yeah, we're going to manually do it. I'm going to use a stopwatch. I'm going to time some things, and like that's
Right.
great. That's fine for like testing every once in a while. A lot of YouTubers could do that. But for us, like, no, there's no way we can do that. So we have to automate. And in order to do that, there has to be really good API hooks. There's got to be ways we can automate things. We actually have to usually establish a relationship with the developers, like we've done with Adobe and Blackmagic and all those guys, to get like these extra API hooks added. Because most of these applications are not made for benchmarking. They're just not. They're made for like the people to actually use it.
Do work, yeah.
Yeah, to do work. And we're coming in and trying to use it in a way it's not designed for. And that's a lot of work. Adobe is kind of the easiest one. But, this comes up even with like DaVinci Resolve. Like DaVinci Resolve, we can test export performance really easily. They actually have a built-in tool for that, so that we're just leveraging. But something like live playback, really, really hard because there's no hooks in the API for doing that. We used to test it, but the way we did it is we had a third-party or external automation utility based on AutoIt is the programming language. It's really nice for automation. It's working less and less these days as applications are moving to Chromium. And there's all these security things. You can't actually see and read what things are on the window, which kind of throws automation out the window. But what we were doing then is we were playing a timeline, taking a screenshot of just a little bit, up in the corner that's the FPS counter once a second.
Yeah.
And then we put it through at the end. I think it was actually a checksum. Like we were doing a pixel checksum. And it would compare it to a database of other checksums, so it would know like, oh, this number is 21 because it has this checksum.
Oh,
and
wow!
anytime it didn't know what it was, it would ask you like, hey, what is this number? And like we were talking about trying to make it work with like Google's screen on-screen reader, like converting, but like it was too low res, it couldn't do it. Talking about making our own AI to do it. It was like, no, we can't. We can't invest 2 years of development to do this one thing.
Right.
So Houdini's kind of along the same lines. It might be one that we'll be able to take on, but honestly, there's higher priority things for us. Ones that we'll get a higher return on. Avid is one.
Yeah, I hear that one a lot.
Yeah, Avid will be a nice one for us once we really dive into it. That one's probably going to be tough too. It's basically, I think we've kind of Adobe is unusually easy to automate testing for. I don't know why. I think a lot of it's because a lot of the developers, they have to do some of this testing for their own internal stuff. So they just like threw it into the API, and their API is terrific. So yeah, we'll see. But I wouldn't expect anything in the next couple of years for like Houdini, unfortunately.
That also, as a part of that answer, touched on another question from Asaf Blasberg, videographer, was asking, will Puget Systems have a benchmark for live playback performance on Resolve? And you kind of talked about that during that.
Yeah, so, the one thing I can say for that is that's one of the reasons we do the test does rendering to H64 and to DNX because the DNX expert FPS usually isn't too far off from live playback. It's not. It's not exact at all, but like usually like the relative performance between things is about in line. And the one thing we've been realizing as we've gotten more and more into these testing, like our Premiere Pro, we used to have or it still is there, we just don't use it as often, an extended test that tests like a dozen different codecs at both 24 and 59 FPS. And I think what we've realized is that is nowhere near enough if we actually wanted to be comprehensive. We were even talking about like different flavors of H64 before, like there's dozens of different flavors of A64. How are we? There's no way we can test it. So what we're starting to lean towards now, and I know this isn't as useful for the general public, but for our customers, I don't know if we've officially launched the service or what, but basically a thing where send us your projects, we'll load it up on a system or two. I think it's going to be like a thing we technically charge for, but if you buy a system, it just gets rolled into the cost of the system. So like for actual customers, it's basically no cost. But if someone wants to use this as a resource because they're going to build their own, or maybe they have a contract with Dell, they'll at least be able to figure out what the right thing is. Because we're just realizing that's the only way to like actually do this stuff. And hopefully we'll be able to kind of turn it into something that's available to the public. Like a lot of times we can't share like the actual testing, like the video we shot for the customer of us tinkering around in Resolve, but if we can say like, okay, here's what the full details on the codec and what we tested, and here's what we found, hopefully we can start putting out some sort of like database that like you can search for your codec and tool, and you'll see our notes on it. Hard thing with that is until we're doing like dozens of those a day, most of the time it's going to be outdated.
Yeah.
by the time you find it. So
That explains all the test videos I see on our YouTube channel.
they're all unlisted because we send those to customers, and the response has been great.
Yeah, it looks like
I guess
it looks pretty popular
yeah,
actually. Yeah.
a little preview I guess on it is I think we're aiming to do 30-minute test sessions, including setup, because usually it doesn't take up that much time. Like, so it says, oh yeah, here's a project. Can you see what performance is like at full res and half res with this configuration I'm planning on buying? So like,
Mm-hmm.
30-minute is about right. I've been doing I just record myself while I'm doing it and just send it to the customer with like final thoughts at the end. Some of the other ones, it's like, hey, it has to run overnight. It's like, no, we're not going to record it. So it's just going to be, here's the final time it took to do this photogrammetry thing overnight.
That is really neat though. Like almost in a way, custom benchmark kind of.
Yeah.
It's super cool. I think that's.
And again, it's the only way to know how it's actually going to work with what you are doing, because nobody does the same thing.
Right.
Like a lot of people think that they're doing, oh yeah, I'm doing the same thing as this other person. Like, no, you're not. You're using like a different camera. Like that alone is going to throw everything off.
Yeah, the plugins, the codec, all that stuff.
We thought about. So oh man, this is starting to get into tangents. The other thing is partially because of all the COVID stuff. We're all working from home. We've now outfitted, I think it's maybe about a dozen of our test beds at the office with IP KVMs. So they're hardware level KVMs. So we have BIOS control. We can install the OS remotely. We do all this testing remotely through them. We were talking about at one point like having almost like a way that you could schedule time. So like there's a certain fee. You can schedule an hour on this system. You can remote in, you can download your project, you can fiddle around with it yourself. And like, there's lag because it's, remote, but you can watch the FPS counters and whatever. You can play around with your own thing and do it. We started to go towards the custom us doing it just because like there's a whole lot less security you have to worry about when you're not giving people access to computers that are on your internal networks. So we've allowed that for a few times. Like I forget who it was. There's some YouTuber who needed some quick testing on something, and we said like, you know what, here's login information. You can just do it. Like we trust you, we know you. It's fine. But for like public, oh man, no, it'd be so hard. So and this way also too, because I think a lot of people don't know what they should poke around at.
Sure.
Because I mean, we're unique in that we have the hardware experience and the technical software experience. I would never say that we're creative enough to do like video editing professionally, but like I can poke around in Resolve and show you like, oh yeah, if we do like set this to red decode at half versus full versus all these things, and hey, let's try this. I feel like we can give more people more value in that 30-minute session that they're paying for than if we let them remote in for an hour for the same cost. So.
Sure. Yeah. So let's take one more question because we are just a touch over our hour. Asaf Blasberg, videographer, asks, what software does Matt recommend for screen recording of Premiere Pro?
I always use just OBS. That's what I use.
That's what I would recommend too.
I have had some weird things. It was actually... I was recording a video for somebody the other day, and I had actually on StreamYard, same thing we're using for this. I was on a live stream with Jason Levine, Adobe, and I was having an issue because I was trying to do a live demo, and I'm also using NVIDIA Broadcast to do noise cancellation on my mic because I've got kids and they've been screaming, and hopefully no one has even noticed. But I've had some issues where I have to make sure that like, I'm not using that because as soon as I start doing stuff in Premiere with like the GPU decoding, it'll make my audio super choppy because it's going through the NVIDIA Broadcast. Same thing with OBS. Like I have to be a little bit careful of like, okay, I know I'm not going to be doing anything GPU based, so I'll set it to the GPU encoding in OBS. Or, hey, I know I'm going to be working with some H264 footage and that's going to load up my GPU and I don't want it to mess up my OBS stuff, so I'll set it to then use the CPU decoding and go it that way. But I think the only way to really get around that would be to do an Elgato and go to like a laptop. You out from your system through the Elgato, which then passes through to your monitor, so it doesn't affect what you're doing, but then you can pipe that to a secondary system that you can record on. But that's a pretty darn complicated. Like if you're doing like constant or regular like webinars or YouTube videos that are showing things. Or I know Adobe is really pushing like the streams on, was it Behance or whatever,
Oh yeah, yeah.
creative streams on their platform. If you're doing that stuff, like it's probably worth investing in like a second, like a laptop or something that you can use for that. But otherwise, I just use OBS. You probably have a better answer to that, Houston, than I do.
I would recommend the same. That's all I've ever done for screen recording. I would recommend a second monitor and do a monitor capture that way. That way you can keep an eye on OBS versus the software you're using, and you can keep that just cleaner. It's just cleaner to have everything you want to capture on a second monitor or second machine. But it's lightweight. It's really easy to use. OBS is free.
Yeah, and I really like. They also added virtual camera into OBS.
Yeah, which is super
really
fun.
Nice.
Very cool.
I haven't used it too much, but like it lets you do really nice like scene changes. So you can go from just you to you in the corner, and then your screen, or just the screen, or second webcam if you want to like show your keyboard or your mouse and keyboard, and maybe put that down on the side. Like it's got overlays a lot of really nice like scene changes. You can put in like hotkeys, or you can get like what is it, Stream Deck or whatever the control panels are.
Yep.
So you can like pop between things really easily between different scenes. Basically, it lets you do all your editing on the fly rather than having to like record your webcam and then record your screen and then put it all together later in Premiere.
It is really nice. Yeah. All right. So that does bring us to an hour 6, a little hour 7. So we're going to, I guess, wrap it up here. So thanks, Matt, for taking the time out of your day and joining us to give us a little rundown on the new Radeon graphics cards. We'll probably do this again in a little while when they come out with more stuff in a couple weeks, I'm sure, or whenever.
Depending on when we can get one.
Yeah, right. So thank you guys very much. Thank you, Matt, for joining us. And as always, thanks to the audience as well for joining us. And thank you for everybody asking questions and stuff. It really makes for good content later and provides value for everybody else in the future as well. So thank you guys very much for that. And as always, we do this Wednesdays and Fridays at 1 p.m. Pacific. Wednesdays, we bring on external experts to talk about their workflow and things like that, and how just tips and tricks and advice on what they do. And then Fridays, we bring our experts on, like Matt here, to talk about the crossover between the hardware and software, and kind of give you guys an opportunity to get a little more kind of in-depth questions for that sort of thing that are more relevant directly to you. So mark your guys' calendars for that. Wednesdays, Fridays, 1 p.m. Pacific time, just about every week. So
Except the end of this month, right? I think we're taking a break for Christmas.
That's true, yeah. So for this month, our last stream will be, I think, the 18th, 16th or 18th, somewhere in there.
Somewhere around there.
And then we're coming back after the new year. Keep an eye on the social media stuff. I'll be putting all that stuff out there for when we're taking breaks and things like that. So, but yeah, is there anything else you'd like to mention before we go, Matt?
No, I'm always surprised at how fast these streams go.
I don't know how
we're going to fill up a whole hour when we're saying like, yeah, AMD did a good job, but didn't quite match NVIDIA. And here we are, hour and 10 minutes.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, all right then. Well, then we'll see y'all later. Bye.
See ya.